Get off this lake right now. You don't belong here. Cheryl's voice sliced through the calm air, her face flushed with anger as she spotted me sitting quietly by Westbrook Lake. My car was parked precisely 89 centimeters from the main road. She charged toward me like a heat-seeking missile, clutching a laminated rulebook as if it were a top-secret government file. But the moment a patrol car rolled up, I revealed a small golden badge and everything shifted. Her confident march froze mid-step. The commanding voice dissolved into silence. Her eyes widened, and she instinctively backed away. She thought she'd summoned help to deal with a trespasser, but unknowingly, she had called in the one person she should never have crossed. Westbrook Lake was a small, pristine body of water tucked inside a quiet suburban community about 40 miles outside Denver. I had been assigned by the Colorado State Environmental Agency to carry out a routine water quality inspection as part of their annual conservation review. Nothing unusual, just another day of gathering samples, testing pH levels, and filing reports most people would never read. I stepped from my car, adjusting my EPA-certified testing kit and double-checking my Federal Aviation Administration drone license. The crisp air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the freshness you hope for near clean water. That's when I saw him, a boy of about 7, with sandy brown hair, playing in the shallows about 30 feet away. My chest tightened. I would later learn his name was Tommy, but in that moment, all I saw was a reflection of my own son, Michael, who would have been the same age if he were still alive. 3 years earlier, Michael had died in Colorado Springs because of contaminated groundwater that officials ignored for months. The memory hit like a punch, but I pushed it down. I couldn't bring my son back, but maybe I could protect other children from the same fate. I had just begun setting up my equipment when a screen door slammed like a firecracker. Cheryl Davenport had arrived. She looked to be in her mid-50s. With perfectly styled blonde hair that seemed impervious to the elements, a crisp white blouse, and a clipboard gripped like a knight's sword. But the true spectacle was her professional-grade measuring tape, which she immediately deployed to calculate the exact distance between my bumper and what she claimed was the official parking limit for the lake. 89 centimeters, she announced to no one in particular, jotting furiously on her clipboard. That's a clear violation of Municipal Code Section 47B, subsection 12A, unauthorized vehicle positioning in a protected ecological zone. The level of self-importance radiating from her could have powered the local grid. She introduced herself as the duly appointed Conservation Commissioner for the Westbrook Lake Protection Authority and accused me of breaking federal environmental laws. I studied her official document, noting that the seal looked like something purchased online for a few dollars. The letterhead was just plain printer paper, and her so-called regulations seemed like a mashup of real laws and rules copied from a website about neighborhood pond maintenance. "Ma'am," I said evenly, setting down my kit, "I'm here on official state business and have the proper authorization for this work." She raised her hand like a traffic officer, ignoring my explanation, and began recording a voice message on her phone in the tone of a reporter covering a scandal. "This is Commissioner Davenport filing an official complaint," she declared, glancing around as though expecting a news crew. "I am documenting the unauthorized presence of a suspicious individual claiming to conduct environmental testing without proper clearance from the Westbrook Lake Protection Authority." Her recording was interrupted multiple times by a low battery warning, forcing her to start over again and again, each time sounding more annoyed. That's when Tommy paused his splashing and called out, "What's wrong, Mrs. Davenport?" His voice carried genuine concern. Cheryl barely acknowledged him, too wrapped up in her crusade to notice the child in the very water she claimed to be protecting. "Nothing you need to worry about, sweetie," she replied briefly before turning back to me with renewed authority. "Now, I'm going to need you to move your vehicle and stop this unauthorized activity, or I'll have no choice but to call the police." I glanced at the serene lake, the joggers passing by, and the boy still playing in the water. Then I looked back at this woman who seemed determined to escalate a routine inspection into a legal battle. "I understand your concern," I said calmly. "I can show you my credentials, but I didn't get the chance." She was already on the phone with 911, speaking as if she were reporting a crime in progress. "Yes, I need police at Westbrook Lake immediately," she said, never breaking eye contact with me. There's a suspicious man here claiming to test the water without proper authority. He may be damaging a protected ecosystem and is refusing to leave when ordered by local conservation officials." I couldn't hear the dispatcher, but Cheryl's responses made it clear they wanted more details. "No, he's not violent," she continued, "but this could be environmental vandalism or even industrial espionage. For all I know, he's working for a private water company trying to gather intelligence for a privatization scheme. I've read about this happening before." Her imagination was impressive, I'll give her that. Cheryl's imagination was something to behold, even as a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Listening to her ever-growing web of accusations, I noticed Tommy had stopped splashing in the shallows. He was watching with wide-eyed fascination at a kind of pure curiosity only children seem to have. When our eyes met, he gave me a small wave. I waved back, thinking of Michael and how he had once loved playing in the water just like this. But then I noticed something that made my chest sink. The boy's hands and forearms were dotted with small, raised bumps, red marks that looked suspiciously like irritation from contact with contaminated water. The distant sound of approaching sirens pulled me back to the moment. Cheryl's posture straightened like a soldier at inspection, her hand smoothing already flawless hair. "Now we'll see about your so-called authorization," she said with a satisfied click of her phone's stop button. As Tommy trotted toward his house, those marks still vivid on his skin, I realized something. Cheryl couldn't yet comprehend. Her call to 911 had just set events in motion that would expose the danger right under her nose. She thought she'd called reinforcements to deal with me. In reality, she had just invited people who would uncover the truth. 2 patrol cars rolled up, their flashing lights shimmering on the still water like some strange carnival display. Officers Mike Rodriguez and Sarah Campbell stepped out, both wearing the expression of professionals who would rather be addressing actual crimes than petty neighborhood drama. Rodriguez, seasoned and steady, had the patient demeanor of someone who had weathered decades of citizen disputes. Campbell was younger, sharp, and carried the no-nonsense confidence of someone who had fought hard to be respected in her field. Before they could even speak, Cheryl strode toward them as though greeting visiting royalty. "Officers, thank you for arriving so quickly," she announced, voice booming across the lake. "I'm Conservation Commissioner Davenport, and I need you to arrest this man immediately. He's violating federal wildlife protection zone regulations and has refused to comply with lawful orders from authorized personnel." She swung her clipboard toward me like it was Exhibit A in a high-profile trial. Her tone had escalated from complaint to something resembling a terrorism alert. She kept darting glances at her phone, no doubt itching to create another official recording for her mysterious board of contacts. "Ma'am, let's take this one step at a time," Rodriguez said evenly, flipping open his notepad. "Can you tell us exactly what law you believe has been broken?" That was all Cheryl needed. She launched into a dramatic recitation from her laminated sheet, rattling off an improbable mix of actual statutes, whole rules, and I strongly suspected a borrowed text from Wikipedia. According to Municipal Environmental Protection Statute 47B, subsection 12, she read with a theatrical cadence, "No unauthorized personnel may conduct testing or sampling within designated wildlife protection zones without prior approval from the local conservation authority. Furthermore, unauthorized vehicle positioning within 90 centimeters of a conservation boundary constitutes a Class C environmental violation." Campbell looked up from her notes, clearly working to untangle the nonsense. "And you are the local conservation authority?" Cheryl drew herself even taller. "I am the duly appointed Conservation Commissioner for the Westbrook Lake Protection Authority, with full jurisdiction over environmental matters in this district." That was my cue to end the charade. I reached into my wallet and produced my Federal Environmental Consultant ID at a golden badge that had opened more restricted sites than I could count. "Officers," I said, "Logan Pierce, Federal Environmental Consultant with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm here conducting a routine water quality assessment under contract with the Colorado State Environmental Agency." The shift in energy was instant. Rodriguez inspected my credentials, glanced at Campbell, then back at me. "Federal Environmental Consultant?" he repeated, his voice now measured and respectful. "Are you here on official federal business?" "Yes, sir," I replied, handing over my authorization documents. Part of the state's annual environmental monitoring program. Just then, Rodriguez's radio crackled with an automated alert I'd never heard before. Federal authority detected. Restricted zone protocol activated. All units maintain appropriate federal liaison procedures. Cheryl's transformation was priceless. Her confident flush drained to a pale white. She stared at my badge like it might combust in her hands, glanced at her phone, then at the officers, then back at me. Federal? That's a broken bar, but this is a local jurisdiction. Matera broken bar. Campbell now regarded her with the same expression you'd give someone insisting they were Napoleon. Ma'am, are you telling us you called 911 to report a federal employee performing authorized work in a federal jurisdiction? The absurdity reached a peak when Cheryl, flustered, tried to record yet another update for her unseen committee. This is Commissioner Davenport with a broken bar in urgent development. The individual claims to have federal there appears to be. Her phone chimed again with a low battery warning, making her fumble and drop her precious clipboard. It skidded across the dock and slipped into the lake with a soft splash, floating away like a defeated warship. Cheryl froze in horror, as though her entire claim to power was drifting off with it. From his porch, Tommy let out a giggle at the sight, easing the tension for a moment. Rodriguez fought to keep a straight face. Ma'am, in the future, you may want to confirm someone's actual authority before reporting federal violations. Then, turning to me with a professional nod, Mr. Pierce, do you need assistance with your work today? My eyes went back to Tommy's house and those red marks on his skin. I've noticed potential water quality issues that could need immediate investigation. The words water quality made both officers exchange a look that told me they understood the seriousness of what I had just implied. Water quality issues? Campbell's tone shifted instantly, her demeanor now fully professional. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just going to be a routine assessment. This could be the beginning of uncovering why kids in the area, like Tommy, might be coming away from the lake with rashes and irritation. The air between us went heavy. Cheryl, still staring at her clipboard bobbing out in the water, seemed to grasp that her little attempt at flexing authority had cracked open a door she would have preferred to keep locked. My eyes drifted toward a spot near her house and drainage pipe that appeared to feed directly into the lake. A suspicion formed. Maybe Cheryl's obsession with protecting this lake had nothing to do with conservation, a broken bar, and everything to do with hiding what was really happening here. Once the officers left, most people would have taken the hint and maybe even apologized for wasting everyone's time. But Cheryl Davenport wasn't most people. Less than an hour after her clipboard had set sail, I saw her on the phone, voice sharp with barely contained panic. "Derek, honey, you need to get over here right now," she said, the sound carrying across the water. "We've got a situation with the lake, and I need your legal expertise." Derek, as I would soon learn, was Derek Mullins, Cheryl's ex-husband and her supposed ace legal advisor on territorial water rights. What she didn't mention, and what would soon become hilariously obvious, was that Derek's most recent professional experience was spinning oldies and reading mattress ads as a local FM radio DJ until about 6 months ago. When he arrived, it was in a battered Honda Accord, wearing a suit that looked like it had been waiting for him since the Clinton administration. He was rail thin, with slicked back grain hair, clearly aiming for professional but landing somewhere closer to county fair master of ceremonies. "Cheryl, darling, don't worry," he said with the booming, polished voice of a man who had spent far too long talking into a microphone. He pulled out his smartphone and started typing furiously. "We're going to handle this situation with the full force of the law." From where I stood, it was easy to see what he was really doing. A rapid-fire Google searches, territorial water rights, federal versus local jurisdiction, environmental testing protocols. Within minutes, the two had set up what they grandly called a community voice recording session on Cheryl's front lawn. A folding table appeared, along with some official-looking folders and Derek's phone and their sole recording equipment. The stated goal, to collect testimony from concerned residents about unauthorized federal intrusion into community resources. There was just one problem. There were no concerned residents. So, they made some up. Cheryl switched into character, adopting different voices for each caller. "This is Mrs. Smith from 42 Maple Street. she said in a pitch just higher than her own. "I'm very concerned about these federal agents conducting secret testing in our neighborhood lake." She'd pause, clear her throat, and then drop into a deeper register. "This is Mr. Johnson from the corner How'sy Broken Bar." Meanwhile, Derek kept feeding her phrases pulled from his frantic searches. "Make sure you mention a violation of local sovereignty," he whispered loudly enough for me to hear across the lake, "and something about potential federal overreach in municipal water management." It was pure theater, so ridiculous that I actually stopped my sampling work just to watch. But then, the comedy tipped into something far more serious. Derek began sorting their evidence into folders on his phone. One folder was labeled FBI Karen Support Group A, which I could only assume was an online community for people who felt unfairly accused of being Karens. But in his rush, Derek tapped the wrong one. FBI Fraud Watch. Every single fake message, every one of Cheryl's altered voices and Derek's scripted legal jargon was instantly uploaded to the FBI's actual fraud reporting hotline. A system designed to log reports of criminal deception now had a perfectly packaged audio record of two people creating false identities and fabricating legal complaints against a federal employee. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Mr. Pierce, this is Agent Martinez with the EPA Criminal Investigation Division," a voice said. "We've just received some very interesting files from the FBI Fraud Unit. It appears individuals in your area may be attempting to obstruct a federal environmental investigation by creating false evidence and impersonating witnesses." I looked across the water at Cheryl and Derek, still huddled over their folding table, utterly unaware that they'd just handed the federal government the rope to hang their own case. They were busy recording their so-called community testimonials, completely unaware they were also documenting their own federal offenses. "Agent Martinez," I said, "I think this case may be more complicated than you realize. I'm starting to believe the people stirring up trouble have strong reasons for avoiding any water testing." Right on cue, Derek raised his phone like a trophy. "Perfect, Cheryl. We now have 17 voiced statements from concerned residents, fully documented and ready for legal submission." He was so proud of his technological achievement that he didn't even notice the automated confirmation texts popping up on his screen, each one thanking him for sending his files directly to federal law enforcement databases. "You're amazing, Derek," Cheryl gushed, clearly feeling bolder than she had since her clipboard went for an unplanned swim. "With evidence like this, there's no way they can dismiss the community's concerns about federal overreach." She shot me a defiant look. "Let's see how Mr. Federal Environmental Consultant handles a united legal front." What neither of them knew was that I was no longer just doing a standard environmental assessment. Thanks to their voice message crusade, the EPA's Criminal Investigation Division was now involved. FBI fraud investigators were combing through their activities, and my own suspicions about Westbrook Lake had grown darker than ever. The preliminary water test results in front of me showed phosphate levels so extreme they were literally off the charts. Tommy's skin rash was beginning to look like the smallest part of a much bigger and far more dangerous problem, but Derek and Cheryl kept celebrating their masterstroke, oblivious to the fact that their next phone call would be from federal agents asking about their innovative approach to witness statements and fraud reporting. It struck me how this all began with nothing more than a measuring tape and a petty parking dispute. Now, we were staring at possible federal crimes, severe environmental contamination, and what appeared to be a carefully hidden cover-up that had gone on for who knew how long. Sometimes the universe has a dark sense of humor about how it delivers the truth. The next day, I returned to the lake with gear that made Cheryl's measuring tape look like a novelty toy. The EPA had overnighted me a full-scale water analysis kit capable of detecting contaminants down to parts per billion, along with official clearance to expand the investigation into what Agent Martinez had politely called potential environmental crimes. More importantly, I brought my FA-licensed drone ready to uncover the secrets Cheryl seemed desperate to keep hidden. While setting up my equipment, my mind wandered to Tommy and the angry red welts on his arms. I'd seen the same symptoms in my son, Michael, before the contamination in Colorado Springs took him from me. That memory of the hospital bed, his small hand and mania turned this assignment into something far more personal. I wasn't just collecting data, I was making sure no other parent lived that nightmare. The prior day's phosphate readings had been shocking, but I needed more complete evidence, see a court-level proof before I could confront anyone. As I worked, I spotted movement in a nearby house. Cheryl was watching, probably plotting her next campaign with Derek. Then Tommy appeared again at the lake's edge. He waved, but this time the marks on his arms had worsened, raw welts stretching from wrist to elbow. They were exactly the kind of burns caused by high-concentration phosphate fertilizers. My pulse jumped. "Tommy," I called, walking over. "How long have you had those marks?" He glanced down, unconcerned. "Oh, they started a few weeks ago. Mom says it's just from playing outside, but they itch." He scratched at one, and I had to fight the urge to stop him right there. I decided I'd be talking to his parents soon, very soon. Launching my drone under full FA protocol, I began a slow, methodical sweep of the area. The high-resolution camera could pick up environmental red flags invisible from the ground. Within minutes, my suspicions were confirmed. There, in her backyard, was Cheryl Davenport, tipping a large container of thick, greenish liquid straight into a storm drain feeding the lake. She glanced around nervously before continuing, clearly aware she was doing something she shouldn't. When she noticed my drone, she wavered, apparently thinking it was a news helicopter. The scene might have been comical if it weren't so damning. The self-proclaimed protector of the lake, actively poisoning it. She stood there, smiling and waving, completely convinced she was being filmed for a news segment about her heroic conservation work. What she didn't realize was that my drone wasn't documenting community pride, it was recording hard evidence. When I zoomed in on the container she'd been pouring from, the label was unmistakable: professional-grade golf course fertilizer, a high-phosphate concentrate. This wasn't a case of casual over-fertilizing or a misguided backyard experiment. It was deliberate, industrial-level chemical dumping straight into a public water source by the very person trying to block any real testing of that water. I immediately reached out to the operator of the nearby traffic camera positioned at the intersection by the lake. With my federal environmental clearance, I requested several weeks' worth of footage. What I saw was a pattern that left no room for doubt. Cheryl had been making early morning trips every few days, carrying different containers and emptying them into the storm drain quietly, methodically, for months. As I was reviewing the footage, my phone rang. "Logan Pierce," I answered, expecting Agent Martinez. Instead, a young woman's voice came through, a nervous, but steady. "Mr. Pierce, this is Emma Davenport. I work in the Colorado State Environmental Agency's Legal Compliance Division. I understand you're investigating Westbrook Lake." The last name hit me instantly. "Are you related to Cheryl Davenport?" I asked. A long pause. "She's my mother. And I think you need to know what you're finding. A broken bar isn't an accident. We met at a small coffee shop 10 minutes from the lake." Emma was in her late 20s, with her mother's blonde hair but none of her combative energy. Her manner was careful, every word chosen with the precision of someone who works in environmental law, where every statement might end up in a courtroom. "Mr. Pierce," she began, "I've been following your case through official channels. There's something I've been holding on to for over a year." She pulled out her phone, showing me email threads dated 14 months earlier. "The state notified my mother that her septic and drainage systems were failing and required urgent repair. Estimated cost, $25,000. Instead of fixing it, she started using concentrated fertilizer to mask the smell and speed up decomposition." The messages were damning. Cheryl had been warned repeatedly by state agencies, offered payment plans, even partial subsidies, but turned down every option in favor of her own solution. She convinced herself she was helping the lake, Emma said quietly. "But when kids started getting sick, and you showed up to test the water, she panicked." That's why she's been so determined to keep people away. It became clear this wasn't just about pollution, it was about control. Cheryl had once lost her home to eminent domain, and it left her with a fierce, almost obsessive need to guard her property at any cost. But no amount of backstrike could erase the fact that children like Tommy were paying the price. "Emma," I said carefully, "what you're telling me could lead to serious federal charges against your mother." She nodded, eyes welling. "I know. But I can't keep covering for here, not when kids are getting hurt. Environmental laws exist to protect people, not shield bad decisions. She reached into her briefcase and placed a USB drive on the table. This will prove she planned it from the start. On the drive were dozens of emails stretching back to the first state notice about her failing septic system. There was nothing accidental about Ida. She had researched, sourced, and implemented her own plan. One email, labeled Alternative Solutions Research, showed her contacting agricultural suppliers for details on phosphate fertilizers and their impact on waste decomposition, as specifically looking for products that could break down organic matter while maintaining environmental balance in aquatic settings. Emma explained that her mother saw herself as an innovator, as someone finding a natural fix by speeding up decomposition. But when rashes began appearing on children, Cheryl didn't stop. Instead, she hired a PR consultant to create talking points about seasonal environmental changes and reinvented herself as the lake's self-appointed conservation commissioner. It was a brilliant, if cynical, tactic. By posing as the lake's protector, Cheryl created the perfect cover to block any legitimate investigation. Among the files were emails to Derica revealing that his role went far beyond recording fake testimonials. He'd been digging into actual environmental laws to help Cheryl craft official-sounding regulations designed to give her false authority over lake access. Authority over the lake was not just a fantasy Cheryl had invented. The Westbrook Lake Protection Authority was a carefully engineered legal Section 8. Crafted to intimidate anyone daring to challenge her decisions. Emma, I said, looking up from the laptop, these emails are proof of a conspiracy to obstruct a federal environmental investigation. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I know, but when I saw those pictures you took of Tommy and the other kids, when I realized children are getting chemical burns from water my mother is deliberately contaminating. As she paused to wipe her eyes, I can't protect her anymore. I won't. A message from Agent Martinez lit up my phone. Pierce, we need to talk. The voice analysis turned up some interesting connections. How soon can you get to the regional EPA office? I glanced at Emma, who stared at her laptop like she was watching her entire life crumble. Emma, you need to come with me. The EPA's criminal investigators will want your testimony, and you'll need whistleblower protections. During that drive, she spoke of the mounting harm caused by her mother's actions. Families had been asking about the lake for months. Mrs. Patterson's daughter developed rashes. The Johnson twins both had unexplained breathing problems. Each time concerns were raised, Cheryl would appear with her clipboard and polished explanations, her tone and demeanor convincing people she was the expert. The bitter irony was that Cheryl's fixation on protecting her home was destroying the very community she claimed to serve. Children were sick, families were anxious, and public trust was eroding. All because she was too proud and too afraid to admit she needed help fixing a failing septic system. You know what hurts the most, Emma said quietly. If my mother had just been honest, if she'd asked for help, the neighborhood would have rallied around her. The HO has emergency funds, the state has hardship programs, but instead, she chose pride. And now children are paying the price. Walking into the federal building, I realized the situation had grown far beyond a water quality issue. It had become a story about pride, trauma, and the desperate measures people take to maintain control. But no matter the reason, one fact remained: Cheryl had poisoned the community's water and actively blocked anyone from stopping it. The truth was finally surfacing, though for some children, the damage might already be permanent. When the EPA investigators arrived at Westbrook Lake, their gear made my equipment look like something from a school lab. Agent Martinez stepped out in a crisp white hazmat suit, loaded with enough monitoring technology to test water on another planet. But what drew my eye wasn't the federal team, it was Cheryl Davenport, standing on her porch with a smug, triumphant smile. At last, she announced loudly for all to hear, someone with real authority to expose this federal harassment campaign. She waved her clipboard like a badge of honor. Agent Martinez, I'm Commissioner Davenport, she declared, and I have extensive documentation of unauthorized federal intrusion into local environmental matters. Martinez regarded her with the polite but wary expression of a man speaking to someone who had no grasp of the seriousness of the situation. Ma'am, we're here to conduct an emergency contamination assessment based on evidence of illegal chemical dumping, Please step back and let us do our work." Instead of cooperating, Cheryl pulled out her phone and began recording. "This is Commissioner Davenport documenting the temporary halt of EPA operations due to procedural violations," she said into the camera. "As you can see, the federal team has been forced to acknowledge local authority." In reality, the agents were simply following standard EPA safety protocol and methodically securing and collecting evidence. But to Cheryl, any pause was proof her legal tactics were working. Emboldened, she moved closer to the team, continuing her narration. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said in a tone dripping with drama, "you are witnessing a community standing up to federal overreach and winning." Neighbors began to gather. Some carried signs reading "Protect our kids and clean water now." The crowd's mood wasn't the supportive rally Cheryl had imagined. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, holding her daughter's hand. The girl's arms were covered in angry red welts, just like the ones I had seen on Tommy. "Cheryl," she said, her voice tight with controlled fury, "my daughter has been to 3 doctors in the past month. Every one of them says her condition is consistent with chemical exposure." What exactly about this is protecting our community?" I asked. For the first time since I'd known her, Cheryl's confident Section 8 wavered. Her eyes darted from Mrs. Patterson to the EPA agents, then to the swelling crowd of neighbors. You could almost see the instant her carefully built story began to unravel. "Now, Linda," she began, her tone losing its edge, "there's no solid evidence linking a few isolated skin problems to lake water quality. These federal agents are here because of exaggerated rumors." Her claim was cut short when Agent Martinez's radio crackled. The preliminary water test results came through a contamination confirmed. Phosphate levels were 4 times higher than the safe limit. The chemical signature matched concentrated agricultural fertilizer. The voice on the radio recommended an immediate evacuation and emergency health screenings for every resident. Cheryl's complexion drained so fast I thought she might collapse. She glanced at her still recording phone, then at the EPA crew, then at the neighbors, and now staring with a mixture of shock and fury. 400%? She whispered, apparently forgetting her live broadcast. "That's impossible. I've been monitoring the concentration levels myself." Her words hung in the air like a toxic mist. She just admitted, in front of witnesses and her own camera, to actively tracking and therefore knowingly allowing a dangerous chemical buildup in the lake. Agent Martinez looked up with the expression of someone who'd just watched a live confession to federal crimes. But the real blow came moments later. Derek's voice suddenly boomed across the lake from a loudspeaker in the town square. His familiar broadcast tone carried an unthinkable message. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Derek Mullins. I must confess that I have been complicit in concealing environmental contamination at Westbrook Lake." He went on to detail the fake messages, fabricated legal authority, and his role in helping Cheryl block monitoring efforts. He announced that he'd handed over complete records of emails, recordings, and other documentation to federal investigators. "I deeply regret my involvement," he added, "especially for any harm caused to the children who've been playing in contaminated water." Cheryl stared at the loudspeaker in stunned disbelief, her phone still capturing every second. "Derek, what are you doing? We had an agreement." "You said you'd help me." She stopped mid-sentence as it dawned on her that her outburst was being live-streamed. The crowd now included nearly every household from the subdivision. Parents clutched their children, eyes fixed on the lake they'd once considered safe. Someone had set up a laptop streaming Derek's confession, while others recorded Cheryl's unraveling on their phones. Agent Martinez stepped forward, his voice formal. "Mrs. Davenport, stop recording and step away. We need to ask you some questions about your knowledge of chemical dumping." EPA agents quickly erected emergency barriers and established a mobile command post. Cheryl's former supporters now looked at her as someone who had poisoned their kids. Federal agents treated her like a suspect. Derek had abandoned her in the most public way possible. The harshest image of all was little Tommy, being held back from the water he'd splashed in for months. He waved at Cheryl with innocent friendliness, unaware that the nice lady with the clipboard had been slowly poisoning him. Months later, I returned with a camera instead of testing gear to document the completion of the state's most ambitious environmental restoration project. Westbrook Lake sparkled under clear skies, safe for the first time in over a year. Where Cheryl's fake conservation signs had once stood, a new sign read, Westbrook Lake A protected by federal environmental standards, restored through community action and federal partnership. The legal reckoning had been swift. Cheryl pleaded guilty to federal environmental crimes, was fined $35,000, ordered to pay full cleanup restitution, and sentenced to 18 months of supervised community service focused on environmental education. Her septic system was rebuilt under EPA oversight, with monthly checks scheduled for the next 5 years. The court also required counseling for what the judge diplomatically called authority and control issues. Derek's punishment was both more severe and more absurd. His confession went viral, racking up over 2 million views. Someone even remixed it into a techno dance track that topped charts at several universities. On the serious side, he faced federal charges for impersonating a legal advisor and conspiring to obstruct an investigation, resulting in 2 years probation and a lifetime ban from offering any kind of legal advice, a ban that seemed redundant given his utter lack of credentials. Social media delivered its own brand of justice. Cheryl's breakdown became meme fodder. Her signature clipboard technique turned into a TikTok challenge that raised funds for water quality programs. Clips of Cheryl's false authority claims soon became late-night talk show fodder, widely cited as peak Karen behavior. Perhaps the most humiliating blow for her was learning that her recorded voice messages were now being used as official training material for EPA investigators studying environmental fraud and obstruction. But from the wreckage came something remarkable. The community began to heal in ways no one had expected. Parents who had once trusted Cheryl's so-called expertise turned their frustration into purposeful action, founding the Westbrook Environmental Monitoring Committee. This time, it was staffed with trained, qualified members who had genuine authority. They pushed for and won a monthly water quality testing, new safety measures for lake activities, and a rapid response system for environmental concerns. The committee's first chairwoman, Mrs. Patterson A., whose daughter endured some of the worst chemical burns, summed up the shift in thinking at the lake's reopening ceremony. We can't just take someone's word because they call themselves an expert. We have to verify. We have to ask hard questions. And we have to put our children's safety ahead of politeness or avoiding awkward conversations. For me, Tommy's recovery was the most meaningful victory. The angry red welts that had so painfully reminded me of my late son Michael's illness were now completely gone, thanks to proper medical care and clean water. Watching him laugh and splash in the restored lake, surrounded by parents who finally understood the value of environmental oversight, gave me something I hadn't felt since losing Michael: a hope that no other child would have to suffer the same fate. Mr. Pierce, Tommy called out when he spotted me photographing the new monitoring station. Look, no more itchy marks. He held up his clear arms with a grin so wide it erased any awareness of how close he'd come to lasting harm. One of the most unexpected heroes to emerge from the crisis was Emma Davenport. Her decision to testify against her own mother earned her a promotion to Regional Environmental Coordinator for the entire metropolitan area. In that role, she launched a groundbreaking whistleblower protection program, encouraging residents to report environmental concerns without fear of retaliation. Sometimes protecting the people you love means stopping them from hurting others, she told a local reporter. The personal toll on Emma was heavy. Her relationship with Cheryl was strained, though they had begun court-ordered family therapy. My mother is learning that control and protection aren't the same thing, she told me during a follow-up meeting. Real protection means admitting when you're wrong and asking for help. As for me, I accepted a federal position as an environmental crime consultant, traveling to communities where fraud was suspected. I thought of Michael, Tommy, and all the children who deserved safe water and honest leadership. The most unexpected ending came in the form of an auction. Cheryl's infamous clipboard, the same one that had floated in the contaminated lake during her first confrontation with authorities, sold for $2,847. Tommy's parents bought it, planning to display it as a reminder that community vigilance is the strongest defense against environmental deception. Just before leaving Westbrook Lake for my next assignment, I received a voicemail from Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI's Environmental Crimes Unit. Her tone was serious. "Excellent work on the Davenport case. Mr. Pierce. But we've uncovered evidence of a broader network, 12 individuals in 6 states, all using variations of Cheryl's manipulation tactics. We need your expertise. This could be bigger than we thought. As I listened, I watched Tommy play safely in the lake while his parents kept a watchful eye. I knew then that Cheryl's scheme was not an isolated act, but I also knew communities armed with awareness could defend themselves against anyone willing to harm children for personal gain. The truth had prevailed. Justice had been served. The water was clean for now. What would you do if someone in your neighborhood was quietly poisoning your children while pretending to protect them? Logan's story is a stark reminder that environmental threats often hide behind friendly faces and false credentials. It's why I tell Thesaja Stories 8 to help you spot the warning signs before they put your family in danger. If this investigation struck a chord with you, and you want more real-world accounts that expose hidden dangers, follow Ya Stories. Together, we can stay one step ahead of those who would deceive us. Thanks for making it through this stir.